Q&A 88, folks. Remember to like the video if you enjoy the Q&As. It helps a lot. Are there any benefits to considering pump and soreness when trying to figure out if an exercise is appropriate for an individual? So if you're getting a pump in the right muscle or if you're getting sore in the target muscle, those are good signs that you are actually training the target muscle. However, the problem is that relative beginners and early intermediates get really carried away with this kind of thing. They'll go like, oh, I'm doing dips and I feel dips in my chest, therefore dips can't grow my triceps. No. So again, for very advanced individuals that need to maximize SFR and make sure that they're really trying to target a weak muscle group that they're trying to bring up, this stuff can be more important. For the rest of you, focus on progression. Out of all the stimulus proxies that exist, gaining strength with matched technique is the best one to tell you whether or not you are getting bigger. You obviously can't measure small changes in muscle mass with pictures or even calipers. So those are kind of off the table. But if with matched technique, you're adding 5 to 10% to lifts, you know that something good is happening. And this is why I want most people to focus on that rather than pump and soreness. For example, in my entire life, or at least in the amount of time since I've been doing hypertrophy training, I'm not sure if my adductors have ever been sore. They're my best body part. When I brace and hold my breath, my breathing fails before my hamstrings on RDLs. Any advice? Dude, the answer to your question is right in the question. Stop holding your breath. Use a different bracing pattern. Breathe on the way down. Hold your breath in the pause. It depends on exactly how you're executing. But if a bracing strategy isn't working for you and it's making your SFR worse by causing you to fail due to breathing instead of the target muscles, use a different bracing strategy. It's really that simple. Are there any negatives to doing mostly unilateral training, doing one side and then the other? The main negative is that you have to do literally twice as many sets, so it takes twice as long to get the exact same stimulus. Or maybe, you get a slightly better stimulus when you do it unilateral, but the time is the issue. So like, if you have 20 sets to do in a workout and now you decide to do all of them unilaterally, you now have 40 sets to do in a workout, and you're not going to be able to fit that in and have them all be productive, mostly junk volume. How did you end up in Vegas in your early 20s? It was all intentional, man. I didn't end up there. It's not like I got like a job there and the wind blew me into Vegas. I basically decided that I wanted to live in Vegas because it was the city that best fit my overall life goals at the time. There was lots of hardcore training there. That's where the Mr. Olympia was. There's lots of powerlifting there. The cost of living was cheap. And of course, Vegas has a crazy nightlife, social life, which was important for me at the time. So I just packed up in my car and moved. I didn't have a job there or anything. I decided that's where I should be. And so I went there and made it work. What is your favorite exercise for glute growth? You mean personally? I don't personally have one. I actually don't even train my glutes directly. They're already good. And really, many male competitors in physique contests don't need direct glute work. However, I guess if you wanted me to pick like the best glute exercise on paper, I would say a front foot elevated split squat. Does training frequency matter, or is it just all about whatever split you can adhere to? Training frequency definitely matters, because consider this. What if you trained every muscle group once an hour? What if you trained every muscle group once a year? So I can see by going to the extremes that frequency definitely matters. There's going to be an optimal frequency for each individual, and it's going to depend on how often they can set PRs on a given lift. In my experience, anything really above like 8 sets, especially if you're training to failure, starts to end up being a lot of junk volume, primarily junk volume. So if you need more than 8 sets a week to grow a particular muscle, you're looking at least 2 sessions, in my opinion. And that can go up depending on how many sets per week you need to grow a given muscle. If you need 18 sets, you might be looking at training that particular muscle group 3 to 4 times a week, assuming that you can set PRs in all of those sessions. So it's just an individual thing, but it definitely matters. Doing a 6-day PPL split. All of my movements are progressing except for the first 2 movements on my first leg day. Is it worth deloading? No, you deload when systemic fatigue is too high. So if there's only 2 exercises that aren't progressing, that is a programming issue, and you need to figure out what's going on. There's really only 2 options. One is that you are doing too much volume for those muscle groups related to those movements on your second leg day, and you're not recovering in time for the first leg day, or you're not doing enough volume on those 2 movements on your first leg day, and you need to do more to progress. Do you ever program ab wheel rollouts? only for powerlifters and strength athletes. The ab roll rollout is difficult to incrementally load, and honestly, it trains the anti-flexion component of the abs. And for hypertrophy purposes, we want to take something through a full concentric and eccentric stretch shortening cycle, whereas what we're doing there is primarily training an isometric function. So I don't think it has a lot of uses in hypertrophy. Is there ever a place for low bar squats in a hypertrophy program? You're not going to reach for that in many scenarios, but if we say that there's never a place for something, that just shows a lack of creativity and imagination. Because as I said when somebody asked me a similar question, a Q&A or two ago, the disadvantages of low bar are also the advantages for the most part. Besides the crippling elbow tendonitis, I don't think that helps anybody. That said, what does low bar do better than high bar and hack squat and all that stuff? It's going to train the hip extensors and the lower back much better, because you're getting a similar range of motion with much higher loads, and those muscle groups, the hip extensors and the lower back, are going to see a relatively larger proportion of the load. Now, oftentimes we're squatting in the first place for quads, but if you have an individual who's squatting for something else, glutes, adductors, just maximum overall systemic growth, maybe they have a lack of available free time or something else, but there are situations where you might want to use a movement that focuses more on glutes and adductors and saves you a little bit of time by giving you a higher stimulus, even though it's probably got a worse stimulus to fatigue ratio. So there's a time and a place. I can't microload. Let me just stop you right there. You're just making excuses. There are so many different ways to microload. First of all, a half kilo plate or a 1 pound plate off of Amazon costs like $5 to $10, which is a couple euros. So you could just buy one. Second, you could also just go around the gym and collect extra clips, and those can be used as microloading implements. You could go to your local hardware store and pick up tiny chains or other loose things and create your own microplates. I've seen people do it. I have clients that do it. So you are just making excuses. But I will also actually answer your question. Just use a different progression model. The standard progression model for hypertrophy training is double progression. So, you pick a rep range, say 8 to 12, and you only increase the weight by whatever the smallest increment that you have is when you can get to the highest number on your rep range. So when you get 12 reps, move up 5 pounds or 10 pounds or whatever the smallest increment you have is. Is periodization necessary for hypertrophy training? The level of periodization necessary for hypertrophy training is significantly less than in powerlifting, but there's still a few situations where it matters. Yes, you need deloads. You need to take time off completely periodically throughout the year. If you're like 2 weeks out from a bodybuilding contest, you might want to change your training to help avoid injuries. You're going to use different levels of volume in a deficit versus a steep deficit versus a surplus. And so there's going to be times where you change your split or your frequency on certain muscle groups because you're trying to emphasize and bring up a weak or lagging body part. So there is definitely elements of periodization and hypertrophy training, but when we're talking about phasic periodization using different rep ranges and stuff, that is entirely unnecessary for the most part. What are the benefits to taking multiple months off of the gym besides psychological and injury factors? Well, those are the only two ones, man. To kind of like reduce burnout symptoms and prepare you for like months of grinding. This is like Kevin Levrone used to take multiple months off per year, and so did Ronnie Coleman. Healing from injuries is the other major one. I guess the only other potential benefit is you might see some level of resensitization to training stimulus. So when you come back to training, you will have to use significantly less volumes to get back to your previous levels of muscularity and slightly beyond. But all of that is going to be offset by the fact that you took multiple months off of the gym. Okay, there's ways to get the resensitization, if it even happens to any significant degree, without taking multiple months off. You probably get that with, a month or 2 month long maintenance block rather than just completely quitting going to the gym for multiple months in a row. Not a good idea. I measured the length of my clavicle on one side to be somewhere between 6 and 6.5 inches. Is that poverty width for males? Did the fact that you think I have any idea whatsoever on average clavicle width for males is low-key hilarious. I've never measured anything like that, and I would not recommend that anyone else do it either. This reminds me of the whole like wrist size thing that people become obsessed with, and they measure their wrists and they become convinced that they have shit genetics or great genetics just based on their wrist size. You're doing the exact same thing. I have no idea. Don't get caught up in that stuff. It really doesn't matter at all unless you're trying to win bodybuilding shows at the highest level, and then your structure is going to become a factor. But you still have to have like the genetics to hold incredible muscularity before that even matters. And most people don't even have that part. And if you're just a hobbyist trying to look good, I mean, who really cares? Who are you comparing yourself against? Why does it matter? You can build a great physique no matter your clavicle width. Do you play video games? No, I do not play video games. I played a lot of video games growing up. Like so many video games that at a certain point in my life, I was probably playing video games like 8 to 10 hours a day. So I really got that out of my system. And as an adult, I decided that I don't want to spend any more of my life on video games. When an exercise lends itself to rest pause, do you try adding a rest pause intensifier before adding another straight set? Generally not, no. I really use rest pause primarily in the case where overall time constraints are becoming an issue, because I think that the SFR of straight sets is better in most cases, unless you have to do a lot of sets for that muscle. Alrighty, folks, that is it for today for the Q&A. If you like the Q&A, please remember to like the video on YouTube, or consider becoming a supporter on Patreon for $1 a month. If you'd like to work with me directly, just shoot me a DM on Instagram, or you can find my coaching email in the description box on YouTube, or, oh, there's no or. If you would like to purchase one of my ebooks, you can find the link to my ebooks in my bio or in the description box on YouTube. So tomorrow is an off day for me. I might try to get out the next installment of the top 10 exercises for hypertrophy if my right arm isn't too much of an impediment. But I will definitely be back to train on Sunday. So until then, folks, have a good one.